The millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. She arrived like a diva, and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. The main hall of the Bellamy Manor in Edgecliff, New York erupted with malicious laughter when Ariel Monroe descended the marble staircase, wearing a dress that cost more than the annual salary of most of the people present. It wasn't laughter of admiration. It was pure, cruel mockery. "Look who decided to show up," Grayson Bellamy whispered to his guests, raising his glass of Dom Perignon champagne. Our dear cleaning lady Ariel was 35 years old and never imagined she would one day step foot in that ballroom as a guest, even if it was a joke. For 2 years, she had cleaned every inch of that mansion, always invisible, always silent, watching those rich people treat each other with rehearsed falsehoods while treating her like furniture. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered with a cruel smile she knew all too well. "Charity gala on Saturday," Grayson said, handing her the gold envelope. "Dress code. Maximum elegance. You surely have something suitable in your wardrobe, don't you?" The laughter of his friends echoed through the hallway. It was an obvious trap, an attempt to humiliate her publicly, to put her in her place in front of New York high society. Grayson had even invited social reporters to document what he called an educational moment. "Let's make a bet," Grayson said to his wife Serena as Ariel vacuumed the day before. $100,000 she doesn't have the nerve to show up. And if she does, she'll be the entertainment for the evening. Serena laughed maliciously. "You're terrible, Grayson. The poor thing will probably show up in something borrowed and feel so out of place that she'll leave within 15 minutes. But Grayson Bellamy didn't know two fundamental things about Ariel Monroe. First, she had grown up in halls like that long before she had to clean them to survive. Second, some storms don't destroy. They just teach you how to dance in the rain. As she walked through the hall under their mocking glances, Ariel kept her posture straight and her gaze serene, like someone carrying secrets that could turn that world upside down. Her steps were sure, calculated, as if each movement were part of a long-rehearsed choreography. "My God, she really came," whispered Beatrix Lovell, wife of a senator, to her friend. "And look how she's dressed. Where did she get that dress?" "She probably rented it and will pay for it in 10 installments," replied Juliet Wexler, daughter of an oil magnate, trying to disguise her own insecurity with cruelty. How pathetic. What none of those people knew was that Ariel hadn't bought, borrowed, or rented that dress. She had simply gone back into her own past to retrieve it. A past that Grayson would have done anything to erase if he had known it existed. Grayson approached her, his chest puffed out with arrogance, surrounded by his billionaire friends. His confidence was sky-high. After all, he had orchestrated this as a public display of power and social control. "Ariel, what a pleasant surprise. I never doubted you'd come. After all, when a person like you receives an invitation to an event like this." "A person like me?" Ariel repeated, her calm voice cutting through the air like sharp silk. "Go on, Grayson. Finish your sentence." For a microscopic moment, something in her tone made Grayson hesitate. There was a firmness there that didn't match the submissive woman he knew from the halls of the manor. But arrogance quickly took over again. "Well, someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling quite intimidated by all this elegance." Ariel smiled. Not a submissive or nervous smile, but something dangerously serene that made some nearby guests stop laughing instinctively. "Intimidated?" she echoed softly, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made Grayson take a step back without realizing it.
"No, Grayson.
I'm feeling exactly where I've always belonged." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough for the atmosphere of the party to change completely. There was something about the way Ariel spoke, the way she moved, the way she occupied the space that defied all the expectations those people had about who she should be. Grayson cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. I'm sure it will be educational for you." "Oh, I'm sure it will be educational for all of us," Ariel replied, her gaze slowly sweeping over the group of guests as if cataloging each face for future use. "If you're enjoying this story of twists and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because what those privileged people didn't know was that Ariel carried with her a secret so explosive that it would turn that night of planned humiliation into the greatest lesson on prejudice and underestimating people that Edgecliff had ever witnessed. Grayson was having more fun than he had imagined. Ariel hadn't run away in embarrassment as he had expected. She remained there with that strangely confident posture that was beginning to bother him in an inexplicable way. "Everyone," Grayson announced loudly, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass to get the attention of all the guests. "I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Ariel, our dedicated cleaning lady." Laughter echoed through the hall like cruel waves. Cell phone flashes began to go off as socialites took photos to post on their social media accounts with sarcastic captions. "Grayson," Serena murmured beside him, feigning concern. "Don't you think you're being a little cruel?" "Cruel?" Grayson laughed loudly. "I'm giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. When else would someone like her ever get the chance to attend an event like this?" Ariel stood motionless in the center of the room, all eyes fixed on her. But instead of the embarrassment they expected to see, there was something disconcerting about her expression. A serenity that seemed to come from someone who had weathered far worse storms. Beatrix Lovell approached with her group of friends, all wearing poisonous smiles. "Ariel, dear, tell me, how long did it take you to choose that dress? It must have been so challenging to find something suitable." "Actually," Ariel replied with a calmness that made Beatrix hesitate, "this dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother." "Her mother?" Juliet Wexler laughed nastily. "And where did her mother get a dress like that? At some fancy thrift store?" Ariel smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. "My mother wore this dress the last time she was in a ballroom like this. That was 20 years ago when she was still Vivica Monroe Bellamy." The silence that followed was deafening. Some people stopped talking, realizing that something important was being said. Grayson, who had been laughing with his close friends, turned slowly. "What did you say?" "Monroe Bellamy," Ariel repeated, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "It's funny how some people choose to conveniently forget their own family history." Grayson's face began to pale. Serena instinctively grabbed her husband's arm, sensing that something was terribly wrong. "You're delirious," Grayson said, but his voice came out less firm than he intended. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't a game, Ariel." Ariel took a step toward him, and several guests instinctively backed away. "It's history, our history, the history you tried to erase when you decided it was more convenient to pretend that certain people in our family never existed." The cell phone cameras continued to record, but now for a completely different reason. Whispers began to spread through the room like wildfire. Serena pulled Grayson by the arm. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying," Grayson replied, but his hands were shaking slightly. "She's a deranged employee trying to get attention." Ariel reached into her small purse and pulled out an object that made several guests gasp. It was a ring, not just any ring, but the traditional Bellamy family engagement ring, engraved with a family crest and featuring the distinctive blue sapphire that had been passed down for generations. "This ring," Ariel said, holding it up for all to see, "was given to my mother by her father, Everett Bellamy, my grandfather, the man you told your children died without an heir." Grayson was now visibly shaken. "Where did you get this? How dare you steal?" "Steal?" Ariel laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Grayson, you can't steal something that is rightfully yours by birthright." Beatrix Lovell, who had been watching open-mouthed, whispered to her friend, "My God, do you think she's telling the truth?" "Impossible," Juliet Wexler murmured, but her voice no longer sounded so confident. "Grayson would have told us if he had a cousin." Ariel heard the whisper and turned to them. "Cousin? No, dear. I'm not Grayson's cousin." She paused dramatically, looking directly at Grayson. "I'm his half-sister." The room exploded in murmurs and muffled exclamations. Grayson looked as if he had been struck by lightning. "This is ridiculous," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "My father would never. You're making this up." Everett Bellamy had an affair with my mother, Vivica, Ariel continued relentlessly. For 5 years, she was the family's piano teacher. When she found out she was pregnant with me, your father promised to take care of us, and he kept his promise until he died. Serena now had one hand over her mouth, staring between Ariel and Grayson as if watching a car crash in slow motion. You, Ariel said, pointing directly at Grayson, decided it would be easier to pretend we never existed. You cut off our allowance, sold the house your father bought for my mother, and left us in absolute poverty. I had no obligation to, Grayson began, but Ariel interrupted him. You had no obligation to take care of your father's family? Interesting philosophy considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that should have been divided between us. The weight of Ariel's words was slowly sinking into the minds of the guests. Several began to move away from Grayson as if physical proximity could contaminate them with a scandal. Prove it, Grayson said desperately. Anyone can make up a story and come up with a ring. Ariel smiled again, and this time there was something predatory in her expression. Oh, Grayson, do you really think I came here without proof? She took her phone and motioned to someone near the entrance. They can come in now. Each new humiliation of Grayson only fueled something inside Ariel that he couldn't understand. A silent force that grew in direct proportion to the injustice he tried to impose. What those privileged people didn't know was that every act of contempt was writing her own sentence. And Ariel had spent 20 years learning exactly how to collect every penny of a debt that transcended money. 3 people entered the hall at that moment, changing the lives of everyone present forever. The first was Margot Hastings, Edgecliffe's most respected investigative journalist. The second was Caleb Worthington, an attorney specializing in inheritance law. The third made Grayson Bellamy stagger as if he had been punched in the stomach. Dr. Elias Trammell, Serena murmured, recognizing the family's private physician. What are you doing here? Dr. Trammell, who had treated Everett Bellamy during the last years of his life, walked to the center of the room. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. 20 years ago, I was forced to sign a falsified death certificate. Everett Bellamy did not die of natural causes. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over a period of months. The hall erupted in muffled cries. Margot Hastings raised her hand. Please keep your phones away. This is an official confession being recorded for legal purposes. Grayson was visibly desperate, sweating. You're crazy, Trammell. My father died of heart problems. Your father found out about the money you'd been embezzling from the company for years. Dr. Trammell continued relentlessly. He had changed his will to include Ariel and was about to report you to the police when he began showing strange symptoms. Ariel remained silent, tears of relief in her eyes. Finally, after 20 years, someone was telling the truth. Caleb Worthington opened his briefcase and took out an official document. This blood sample was tested last week by an independent laboratory. The arsenic levels were fatal. You're making this up, Grayson shouted, but his voice was completely uncontrolled. It's a conspiracy to ruin me. Margot Hastings stepped forward. Mr. Bellamy, I have transcripts of 5 conversations you had with Dr. Trammell between 2003 and 2004 where you threatened to ruin him professionally. Ariel finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Grayson, you didn't just kill our father. You stole 20 years of my life. I didn't kill anyone. Grayson pointed his finger in all directions. You're all lying. Then explain this, said Ariel, connecting her phone to the Manners sound system. A recording began to play. Grayson's voice was unmistakable. Trammell, you're going to keep your mouth shut about anything strange you found in the old man's blood. If you open your mouth, I guarantee you'll never work as a doctor again. And as for that woman and her bastard daughter, they'll have to fend for themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the people who had defended Grayson now shunned him as if he were radioactive. Serena stared at her husband in horror. Grayson, you really did this? 20 years. Ariel screamed, her composure breaking momentarily. 20 years of cleaning my own father's blood off the hands of his killer. Ariel took a deep breath and regained her deadly calm. You want to know how I got all this evidence? I didn't come to work here by accident. I applied specifically for this position. I spent 2 years preparing, gaining access to the house, collecting evidence. Grayson tried one last desperate gambit. Even if all that is true, it doesn't change anything. The inheritance was distributed years ago. Caleb Worthington smiled for the first time. Actually, Mr. Bellamy, when there is evidence of murder, all assets can be redistributed according to the original will. And we have a copy of Everett Bellamy's actual will. Ariel approached Grayson, who was leaning against the wall like a cornered animal. Do you know what my biggest mistake was, Grayson? It was believing that you would change on your own. Please, Grayson whispered. All arrogance evaporated. Serena, the children, this will destroy our family. You destroyed our family the moment you chose money over justice. Grayson collapsed into an armchair, completely defeated. His transformation from arrogant millionaire to exposed criminal had taken less than 2 hours. Ariel looked at Grayson one last time. He was broken, but that was only the beginning. What Grayson didn't realize, and would discover in the worst possible way in the next few hours, was that Ariel had spent years gathering evidence not only about her father's death, but also about all the financial crimes, blackmail, and corruption he had committed over the decades, weaving a web of justice so meticulous that his downfall would be spectacularly complete. The next 2 hours turned the most exclusive gala in Edgecliff into the biggest scandal New York high society had ever witnessed live. Grayson was now sitting on the floor of the ballroom, his back against the wall, watching his entire life unravel in real time. Margot Hastings had connected her laptop to the Manor's projection system, and documents, photos, and recordings appeared on the giant screen for all the guests to see. This is a bank transfer of $200,000 from Grayson Bellamy's personal account to Dr. Trammell, dated 3 days after Everett Bellamy's death. Margot narrated as the image appeared on the screen. The memo on the transfer reads, "Silence is golden." Serena was now on the other side of the room, as far away from her husband as possible, crying silently as she processed 20 years of lies. And this, Margot continued, is a recording of Grayson talking to his accountant about how to hide the company's embezzlement. Grayson's voice echoed through the room. I need you to make the numbers dance. If anyone finds out I've taken out $20 million over the last 5 years, I'm ruined. Blame it on market fluctuations, expansion costs, whatever. Beatrix Lovell whispered to her friend. My God, he stole from his own company. Ariel remained in the center of the room, calm as the eye of a hurricane, watching each revelation systematically destroy the life of the man who had murdered her father. Caleb Worthington approached with a new folder. Mr. Bellamy, in addition to the criminal charges, I must inform you that Miss Monroe is filing a $50 million civil suit against you for wrongful death and misappropriation of inheritance. $50 million? Grayson looked up with glazed eyes. I don't have $50 million. No, Ariel said softly, but your company is worth $120 million, and half of it has always been mine by right. Margot Hastings continued the devastating presentation. We also have evidence that Grayson blackmailed at least 5 local politicians, bribed 3 judges, and diverted charity funds to personal accounts. Each new revelation drew gasps of horror from the guests. People who had arrived as Grayson's friends now moved away as if he were radioactive. Ariel, Grayson said in a broken voice, please, you got what you wanted. Stop this. Ariel stepped forward and knelt in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. Grayson, you killed our father. You stole my family, my inheritance, my dignity. You made me clean his blood off your hands for 2 years. I can make it up to you, he whispered desperately. There is no making up for 20 years of injustice, Ariel replied with haunting calm. But there are consequences. Serena's phone rang. It was one of their children calling from college. Mom, is everything okay? Are they saying on the internet that Dad is a murderer? Serena looked at Grayson with utter disgust. His own children are finding out what kind of monster you are on social media. Grayson tried to stand, but his legs gave way. Serena, please. The children.
No.
Serena screamed, silencing the entire room. You don't mention our children. You've shamed them forever. Dr. Trammell approached Ariel. Miss Monroe, I must inform you that I have already contacted the police. Grayson will be arrested later today for murder. Murder? Fraud? Blackmail? Tax evasion? He will spend the rest of his life in prison. Ariel turned to the guests, who watched her with a mixture of admiration and terror. I want everyone to understand one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for justice, for all the people who have been trampled on by men like Grayson Bellamy. Beatrix Lovell approached hesitantly. Ariel, we're so sorry. We didn't know. You knew I was treated like subhuman, Ariel replied firmly. You laughed. You participated. The only difference is that now you know I have more money than you. The sound of sirens began to echo from outside. The police had arrived. Grayson looked at Ariel one last time. You've destroyed my life. No, Ariel said, standing up with all her dignity. You destroyed your own life the moment you chose evil. I just made sure the truth came out. As the police officers entered to arrest Grayson, Ariel walked out onto the balcony. Outside, dozens of reporters were waiting. TV cameras, photographers, journalists. The story had already spread. Serena approached her on the balcony. Ariel, I really didn't know anything. I know, Ariel said gently. You were also a victim of his. What's going to happen now? Ariel looked out at the city sparkling below. Now, Serena, justice will finally be served. And maybe Edgecliff will learn that class has nothing to do with a bank account. As Grayson was led away in handcuffs by the police, passing through the same hall where he had tried to humiliate her hours earlier, Ariel felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years, peace. What Grayson would discover in the next few hours in jail was that Ariel had planned every detail. Not only of his downfall, but also of the complete rebuilding of her own life, and that the Bellamy Empire now had a new heir who would make sure to use that power to protect exactly the kind of people he used to trample on. 6 months later, Ariel Monroe Bellamy sat in Grayson's former office, now completely renovated. The walls that once displayed trophies of arrogance now displayed certificates from social projects and photos of employees promoted from entry-level positions to executive positions. Grayson had been sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The charges included murder, corporate fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion. His personal fortune was completely confiscated to cover compensation to the victims. Ariel was just one of many people he had harmed over the years. Miss Monroe Bellamy, said Amanda, her new executive assistant who had previously worked as a cleaner in the building. Legacy Monthly is here for the interview about the company's transformation. Ariel smiled. In 6 months, she had increased the company's profits by 40%, simply by treating employees like human beings. Fair wages, promotions based on actual merit, and a respectful work environment had created a level of productivity that Grayson had never achieved with his toxic leadership. Serena had divorced immediately and moved out of state with her children. Before she left, she sought out Ariel to apologize in person. You could have destroyed us completely, but you chose to protect my children. I will never forget your generosity. Children don't pay for their parents' sins, Ariel had replied. They deserve the chance to be better people than he was. Dr. Trammell now worked as a medical consultant for the company, offering free care to all employees. I never thought I'd have the courage to do the right thing, he told Ariel during a meeting. You taught me that it's never too late to find our dignity. Beatrix Lovell and Juliet Wexler had tried to reach out to Ariel in the weeks following the scandal, but she kept them at a polite distance. You laughed at me when you saw me as inferior. Now you want my friendship because you found out about my bank account? That says everything about you. Ariel's story had gone viral worldwide. She received invitations to speak at universities about leadership and social justice, but she preferred to focus on the real work. I don't want to be famous for suffering, she explained in a rare interview. I want to be known for what I built afterward. The company now sponsored scholarships for employees' children, a microcredit program for entrepreneurs in underserved communities, and had created the largest domestic violence support fund in New York. On a quiet afternoon, Ariel received a letter from prison. It was from Grayson. Ariel, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know you taught me that the person I became was a monster. I spend every day trying to understand how I turned into someone capable of killing his own father for money. His children asked about you on their last visit. They want to meet the aunt who protected the family when their father failed. Ariel kept the letter without replying. Forgiveness was a personal journey, but justice had already been served. During the interview with Legacy Monthly, the journalist asked, "Some people say your revenge was too cruel. What do you say to that?" "Revenge would have been to do to him what he did to me," Ariel replied calmly. "Justice is ensuring that he pays for the crimes he committed and that other people don't suffer what I suffered. There's a fundamental difference between the two." "And what advice would you give to people facing similar injustices?" Ariel looked out the window, watching employees having lunch in the company garden that now offered them respect and dignity. The best revenge is not to destroy those who have hurt you. It is to build something so great that the injustice you suffered becomes only the first chapter in a story of triumph. That night, Ariel returned home, not to the small apartment where she had nurtured her dreams of justice, but to a comfortable house where she had adopted 2 orphan children who, like her, needed a second chance at life. As she helped the girls with their homework, she thought of the father she had never really known, but whose blood ran through her veins. Everett Bellamy would be proud to see that his daughter not only recovered what was stolen from her, but turned a company built on exploitation into a symbol of opportunity and dignity. Ariel's real victory wasn't dethroning Grayson. It was proving that when you build power based on justice rather than fear, that power multiplies and benefits everyone around you. Grayson tried to humiliate a cleaning lady and ended up discovering that he had underestimated an ally. More importantly, he discovered that dignity cannot be bought, inherited, or stolen. It is earned through the choices we make when no one is looking. If this story of justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that good always wins when you have the right strategy, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone has chosen to ignore.